Hello and welcome back to the channel, and we're back to Bond. You Only Live Twice was my favourite Bond film growing up, and quite possibly still is. It's certainly at the top end of the list. I think it was the first Bond film that I saw. It's the first one that I remember seeing, certainly. It was, back then, a perfect blend of 60s chic, science fiction and exotic faraway locations to really capture the imagination of a roughly 10-year-old me. You Only Live Twice was the most fantastical film of Sean Connery's tenure, the franchise resetting from the spaced focused action to the much more grounded in multiple senses drama of On Her Majesty's Secret Service. It was also, of course, supposed to be Connery's last outing in the role. By this point, he'd grown tired of the demands of both the part. Until You Only Live Twice, there'd actually been an entry every year since Dr. No, and he'd grown tired of the attached media and fan scrutiny. And all the attention that came along with being the world's most famous spy. In the end, he did return for one more film as the producers got cold feet after George Lazenby's mixed reception. Looking back at the film now, it's fair to say that my childhood imagination painted over some of the creakier parts, though there are certainly plenty of positives. Let's start with a general overview and quickly go through the film in case you're not familiar with it. Released in 1967, You Only Live Twice begins with an orbiting American spacecraft intercepted, attacked and effectively kidnapped by a mysterious craft of unknown origin. Resultingly, the Soviet Union and the USA are accusing each other of being behind the attacks and threatening to declare war if these keep happening. The British government, however, notes that the unknown spacecraft appears to hail from Japan, a country with no space program at this time. They have sent their best man to investigate. We then get a sequence that looks to fake out the audience that Bond has been killed, but is soon revealed that it has all been a ruse to throw those looking for Bond off the scent. Of course, it would help if he stopped formally introducing himself to every villain that he meets. Bond boards a submarine off the coast of Hong Kong via his own funeral and receives his briefing from M, who is on board, and in his own marvellously wood-panelled office on the submarine. Even Moneypenny is present. Travelling to Tokyo to meet a contact who says they have a vital lead on who is behind the rogue spacecraft, Bond attends a sumo match, encountering Aki, who we learn is with Japanese Secret Service. Bond's contact is killed before being able to reveal what they know, but Bond is able to eliminate and impersonate one of the assassins. This leads him to Osato Chemicals, where he manages to obtain some documents from a safe before having to flee the building. Aki, whose loyalty at this point is still unclear, arrives to drive Bond away. She then plays with Bond a little before leading him to meet Tiger Tanaka, the head of Japanese Secret Service in his underground HQ. Examining the documents that Bond collected, they are alerted to a cargo ship called the Ningpo. Bond then does as he does with Aki. The next day, Bond goes to Osato Chemicals, posing as a potential new client. Mr. Osato, however, is onto him straight away, and after their meeting orders his assistant Helga to have Bond killed. One unimaginative assassination attempt later, Bond and Aki head to the docks to get a closer look at Osato's operations. They discover the ingredients for rocket fuel being loaded onto the ship from the documents that Bond had captured, and then in a fantastically shot sequence, Bond fights off numerous assailants, allowing Aki to escape. Finding himself held captive, Bond is first interrogated by Helga before she then seemingly seduces him, agreeing to help him find the ship. However, whilst flying in a small plane the next day, she traps Bond and bails out, mocking the idea that she would change allegiance as she leaves him to plummet to his death. Of course, though, he manages to escape the trap and requests that Tygo calls MI5 and requests Little Nelly and her father. The father is Q and Little Nelly is an autogyro armed to the teeth. Flying over the remote area where the cargo ship appears to have unloaded its cargo, Bond is attacked by a squad of helicopters in one of the film's signature set pieces. In the wider world, tensions are rising as a Soviet spacecraft is also attacked by the unknown spacefaring assailants. This time we follow the rogue craft back to its awesome volcano base, where we learn that Blofeld and Spectre are behind events. Helga is killed for her failure to kill Bond. Tiger then briefs Bond that he is to pose as a Japanese man and husband of one of the women in the village near where he was attacked in the air as they search for the hidden base. As assassins attempt to get Bond again, Aki is poisoned and dies. After some unconvincing surgery and makeup, Bond heads to the island and is paired with Kissy. The pair investigate a nearby cave and are forced to make a quick escape as poison gas fills the area. Finding themselves now near the top of the volcano, they spot a helicopter lower down into the basin of the volcano and seemingly disappear. They arrive as the disguised hatch covering the launch base is still closing. Bond sneaks in and sends Kissy to fetch reinforcements. Inside the base, Bond frees the hostage astronauts before attempting to infiltrate a soon-to-launch Spectre spacecraft. However, he is apprehended and taken to Blofeld in the control room. With the help of a rocket-firing cigarette, Bond brings chaos to the control room as reinforcements attack outside, and he manages to open the overhead hatch of the base long enough for Tanaka's ninjas to make it inside. All heck breaks loose as a pitched battle begins for control of the base. Just before the Spectre craft intercepts another American ship, Bond manages to reach the self-destruct, blow it up and avert a global war. Blofeld escapes as the base begins to explode, and we close with Bond and Kissy, well, getting Kissy on a raft. So that was a quick synopsis, but let's take a close look at what works well and what works less so well. This is an aspect of the film that shines. Ken Adams' work throughout the franchise is great, but here it is spectacular. The whole film has an amazing sense of, well, amazement, from huge internal spaces to incredibly detailed smaller interior spaces, all of them carrying distinct feels. The first really striking example is M's office on board the submarine in the opening act. It's a fully wood-panelled office complete with desk, globe, books, paintings and statues. It really is M's typical office shrunk down to fit into the maritime space. The finishing touch being M and Moneypenny in their navy dress uniforms. On a similar line, we have Tanaka's underground office and train. An office much like M's, repositioned into an unlikely space, but this time rather than the old world traditional feeling of its MI5 equivalent, it has a modernist futurist feel to it, which helps underscore the exotic and technologically exciting depiction of Japan that the film projects. Of course, the real eye-catcher in the film is Spectre's volcano base. These days, the concept of the villain's lair in the volcano is a gag, but that doesn't distract from how impressive the set that launched those jokes is. Firstly, there is the sheer size of it. It even has its own functioning monorail, and then there is the amount of detail. Each section of this massive space appears to have its own function and purpose, and it's all underneath that huge rolling roof that forms the mouth of the volcano. Even the scouted locations are visually striking, like the Control and Reporting Centre at Magero in Norway that is used for the meeting place that the UN-like body in the opening parts of the film meets in. Only really the fishing village in the final third seems to be rather bland and uninspiring, but then this whole section of the film feels oddly like something of an afterthought that has been added to pad out the runtime. There are a number of fantastic action sequences throughout the film, and these are fabulously varied. We have airborne dogfighting, punch-ups, massive pitched battles, and more. One particularly impressive stunt comes as Aki and Bond are chased away from Osato Chemicals. As Aki guns it down the highway, she calls in air support in the form of a helicopter that sweeps in and grabs the pursuing car off the road with a massive magnet before dropping the villains into Tokyo Bay. Of course, this being a 60s film, aside from some backdrop inserts, this all happens for real. A real helicopter really lifts a car into the air before really dropping it into some water. Fantastic stuff. We have a couple of sequences that focus on fistfights. The first in the Osato office sees Bond take on one of Osato's men in a pretty one-sided fight. This huge figure is actually Peter Maivia, grandfather of Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, and in a sequence choreographed by Maivia, we see him viciously throw Connery's Bond around until the super spy manages to smash a handy nearby statue over his opponent's head. The second fist fighting sequence that sticks in the memory takes place in the docks. It starts off slow with Bond and Aki taking care of a few dockers that are alerted to their presence. However, things escalate as more and more dock workers join the fray, and as Aki escapes, Bond retreats to the roof of a nearby building. Pursued as he does so, we followed the action with a sweeping overhead helicopter shot. It's the first real example of flair in the cinematography of a Bond film, which up to this point have been filmed neatly and efficiently rather than with any real imagination. And how could you forget the sight of the massive pitched battle in the finale that sees a horde of ninjas take on the forces of Spectre within a hollowed out volcano? But I would say the standout sequence of the film is the air battle between Little Nelly and a wing of enemy helicopters. Little Nelly being the heavily armed autogyro, one of the standout gadgets of the entire franchise. The Wallace WA-116 Agile Autogyro was designed and flown in the film by retired RAF Wing Commander Ken Wallace. Cameraman John Jordan was injured during the shoot, losing a foot when a helicopter underneath his own hit an updraft and suddenly pitched upwards, its rotor blades slicing Jordan's foot. It took several days and many hours for the team to capture the footage needed for the sequence, an effort well rewarded with an exciting aerial duel. If you want to know more about it, I've put a link to a fascinating article about this sequence in the description box below the video. Much more mixed bag aspect of the film here. A number of things work well, like having Bond in an environment that is alien to him with the Far East setting. But on the flip side, things like Tanaka's decrying of Western women has aged horribly. Though, to be fair, that one probably wasn't even really any good at the time. One thing I do really like here is the use of the Cold War. It is the backdrop of tensions between the Americans and the Russians that adds the potential world-threatening aspect of things to the plot. But it manages to do so without making the Russians the outright villains. We get some solid spycraft built into the plot, with Bond sneaking into Asako's office and the documents he finds there being the clue that then links to the ship and the docks, which then leads to the remote islands. It's appreciated when there are a number of films in this spy franchise where Bond essentially does no spying and just sort of walks up to the villains announcing his identity to them, and then just follows them around Columbo style until they get exasperated at it. Although it has to be said, there is a questionable bit of plotting with the attack on Bond as he flies over the island in the autogyro. It's just after he's radio based to say that he sees nothing that he is attacked, and you can't escape the notion that had he just been left alone at this point, the good guys would have been clueless and at a dead end. It's the one time in the film that the writers don't seem to have had a good way to move things forward. The good-bad balance continues when we consider Aki. She is a great character and pretty much on a par with Bond in her capabilities. And this all decades before tiresome folk were complaining about Bond accepting lifts on the back of scooters. She rescues him a few times, she manages to lure him into a trap, and she also appears to be as much in control of their physical, let's say, relationship as he is. And for 1967, it's such a progressive thing to see. Unfortunately, in the last third of the film, she is killed off and replaced by Kissy. Kissy being a direct replacement, both in role and essentially character, as there's no time to develop Kissy as her own person. It's a baffling choice, and I really don't understand why it's done. I guess it's an attempt to raise the stakes, but it just doesn't work, mostly because Aki is practically directly replaced and no one appears to mourn her. It comes across as a sort of 2 steps forward, 2 back. We have a strong female character, steps forward, but then she is fridged, so to speak, step back, and then everyone apparently seems to forget that this even happened, step back. It's a shame, as the film really wouldn't need much of a rewrite to keep Aki in through to the end. And of course, this final section of the film contains another really odd, questionable choice, and that's the disguising of Bond as a local fisherman. There are 2 points here. One is the very obvious fact that putting a wig on Connery and pinning back his eyes really doesn't work as a disguise at all. It's not done with any kind of malice in terms of stereotyping, so I would give the film a pass from any kind of accusation of racism, but it is very cringeworthy. The other element to this is that it doesn't make sense. The good guys are very much on a timeline. They know another spacecraft interception will lead to war, and one is scheduled within 2 days. Yet the plan is to spend hours disguising Bond, then to insert him into a fishing village, complete with staged wedding, and then have him and Kissy spend days searching the area. At this stage, it's a terrible plan. It does feel like these scenes added to pad out the running time a bit as a bridge between the Little Nelly sequence and Bond infiltrating the volcano base. Overall, the writing is a bit hit and miss, so it's not surprising that screenwriter Roald Dahl, yes, the famous children's author, speak about the challenge of turning Fleming's original novel into a serviceable story, describing the original novel as basically a travelogue. The film, I think, largely holds up today as a very enjoyable watch. There are parts that sort of clunk, but overall it's very watchable. And aside from some lines from Tanaka that have aged very badly, it comes across to me as one of the more progressive entries in the franchise from this era. So if you've not seen it, give it a watch, and if it's one that you hold memories of but sort of fear going back to it, go for it. Having recently got hold of all the Bond films during this kind of era of being at home a lot for reasons that we all know about, I'll probably do some videos on some more of the franchise fairly soon, but for now it's goodbye.